What's up, everybody? What's going on? Welcome to another episode of Lead From Here podcast. I'm Jason. Today we're talking about interviewing potential leaders. And this is something that I struggled with for a very long time. I tried to make it a very gut feeling, and does this person feel like they care? They're communicating the things that I would expect them to communicate as a leader. And it wasn't until I had worked with a couple of people that were very clearly not leaders, but made it through very solid leader panels. I wasn't on either of those panels, but ultimately, I didn't learn directly from bad interviews, which I definitely interviewed some people that did not pan out in my day. Don't get me wrong there. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's very, very clear. It's very clear that they are not leadership material. They talk about themselves constantly. They're the things they're best at, the way teams have failed them, the way their leaders have failed them, the way all of these things, that kind of point to them being the center of it all. That kind of shows you that this person is probably not a great leader. Now, I understand in an interview situation, you got to build yourself up, but there's a balance, right? There's a line you can't really cross, and calling out your teams as failures, calling out your leaders as failures, there's a disconnect there. So that's probably the minority of most of your interviews. Most of the time, it's going to be much more subtle. So it's really on you to kind of suss out what is actually going on. Who are they? What do they bring to the table? What is their philosophy on leadership? And you can ask them what their philosophy on leadership is. That's a good question to ask. Hey, what's your leadership philosophy? How do you handle leadership? And based on how they kind of respond to that, you can kind of get a little bit of an idea, but it's actually better to go very tactical and ask them hey, talk me through an experience with an employee where you had to have a difficult conversation. How did it happen? How did you handle it? How did they respond? And what was the outcome? Tell me about a time where you felt somebody needed to get a raise. Your bosses disagreed. How did you communicate that back to that person that they were not ready? Another good example is saying hey, as a leader, where do you see yourself creating the most impact within your team? That's a great question. I think it kind of dives into, their view on what their impact on the team is, because you can understand if somebody's hey, what I say goes, and if they're not doing it, they're gonna know it that. Okay, that's probably not the guy you're looking for or girl you're looking for. If it's hey, I just kind of let the team do whatever they want, and if they're successful, they're successful. If they fail, they fail. It's on them either way. Also, other extreme. So it's important to understand how they plan to actually get in the team and understand the work. And you can get to that by asking very pointed questions and ask for specific examples in previous jobs. And if they have no examples, then it's on you to start asking questions about integrity. What do you think about integrity? What do you think about honesty? What do you think about empathy? What do you think about in difficult conversations? Do you feel like you should give opportunity for feedback? Do you feel like you shouldn't? And kind of start asking more pointed questions about more characteristic-based questions, hey, what do you think about this topic? And let them kind of just riff. Don't ask I need to know a specific example, because they don't have it. Now you can maybe ask is there an opportunity in your team where you weren't the leader but you got an opportunity to lead? Maybe, but ultimately you're really wanting to dive into the characteristics and what they think about all these higher level character topics, and understand, let them kind of riff, because if they riff and they kind of go off board and start pointing their own stuff again, it's again not a perfect science, but ultimately that can lead you down the path maybe this person isn't ready for leadership yet. Now again, sometimes you're gonna have to take a risk, especially in brand new leaders. You're taking a risk. There's just the reality of it. Sometimes they work out very well, sometimes they don't, and it's on you to learn through all of that. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, Jason@leadfromhere.co. Otherwise, take care.